Hello, my name is Todd Manow, and today I'll be talking to you about Wilderburbs and its relation to current scientific knowledge. This presentation will be divided into the following sections: author information, book introduction, and then I'll be talking about water in the Wilderburbs, fire on the forest edge, and wildlife out the back door. Lincoln Bramwell, author of Wilderburbs, Communities on Nature's Edge, has been the chief historian for the U.S. Forest Service for the past decade. He received a Ph.D. in environmental and public history from the University of New Mexico in 2007. Wilderburbs focuses on a recent phenomenon drawing urbanites out to master-planned communities in arid mountain forests in several southwestern U.S. states, discussing the logistical struggles and the ecological implications involved. This book gathers data from his current position and draws on his experience as a wildland firefighter in the 1990s. In the Southwest, Native Americans sustainably subsisted for thousands of years on game, forage, and small farms. They used fire and forage to manage the forests around their settlements, clearing the undergrowth from the ponderosa pine stands and enriching the poor soils in the valleys for their farms. Many tribes hunted the proliferate moose, elk, and mule deer in the region until Anglos displaced Native Americans during the period of U.S. expansion westward. Half a century ago, it was rare for Americans to live in forests, as a lack of services deterred permanent residents in wilderness areas. Those that chose wilderness living would typically have been wealthy enough to sustain 2 households in seasonal travel. A shift in attitudes among wealthy professionals, as well as their work habits and requirements, has allowed a growing population to relocate to these wilderness areas, building communities of suburban density and lot size nestled among the trees, creating what is commonly known as the wildland-urban interface. This ex-urban sprawl deals with logistical issues connecting water and sewerage to previously uninhabited arid forests. These homes are more likely to be exposed to forest fires, nestled as they are amongst dry, overgrown forests of the western United States. Furthermore, homes built in wilderness areas have a high incidence of interactions with wild animals, which can result in injury or death in both humans and wildlife. One of the most important logistical issues when planning a community is a reliable water supply. These ex-urban developments use different tactics to supply water to residents. In the Berlin Ranchettes, a subdivision built a short distance from Denver, water supply is via private wells and wastewater is handled via septic systems. Paco Communities, outside of Albuquerque, has no groundwater of its own, but takes advantage of state laws protecting the water rights of private landowners to transport water from 2 other counties to the development, despite not recharging those aquifers. The residents of Summit Park, Utah, grew so irked with continuing water supply failures brought on by inconsistent aquifers, poor planning, and shoddy construction that they took over the water company and joined forces with the neighboring community to supply and store water for both. Overconsumption slows the recharge rate in aquifers, and this can affect even large basins, especially with global warming. Furthermore, the movement of groundwater between aquifers is not as prevalent as once thought, even less so in geologically complex terrains. And the legality of transporting water from lower-lying but more stable aquifers changes from state to state. When the U.S. began expanding into the southwestern territories and displaced the Native Americans, the forests were still maintained somewhat by fire, as lightning strikes are common in the region, but undergrowth began to fill in the gaps. Since the turn of the last century, agencies at both the state and federal level have adopted policies that attempt to curtail forest fires. Initially, for the protection of lumber interests, and then to protect rural settlements in western states. Interrupting the natural processes and pre-Columbian human management of forest floors via small fires and forage has actually increased the likelihood of devastating wildfires, especially as global temperatures rise. The thick undergrowth provides more fuel and fires burn hotter and longer, affecting wider swaths of forested area. Houses that abut the forest edge are at risk. Those that are surrounded on all sides by scrub are just kindling. Impacts related to the forest fires and wildland-urban interface are shown to be a very real issue when comparing the different responses to fire by residents who have been educated in forest fire response and mitigation. Regardless of education, ex-urban houses are more at risk of fire than their urban counterparts. Yet, construction of houses tucked into forests has been increasing, especially in western states. Buyers of homes in the wildland-urban interface are often attracted to the prospect of sharing their properties with woodland creatures. Images of deer and elk feature prominently in sales listings in these areas, while predators, destroyed gardens, and decimated songbirds are not. Populations of wild animals, whose habitats are being compressed by development and fragmented by roads, increasingly find their way into human-occupied areas. As warmer and drier weather affects food supply in the mountains, black bears, mule deer, and moose will invade gardens to raid trash bins, bird feeders, and flower beds, and even break into houses to access pantries for sustenance. As these wild animals become habituated to human presence, some people tend to think of them as being tame. However, attacks by cougar and black bear, aggressive encounters with moose, and mule deer invading gardens can lead to injury or death, and calls for wildlife managers to remove and relocate nuisance animals. Many of these animals are highly territorial and do not survive relocation. Biodiversity suffers in this way, as well as through damage done by introduced species such as house pets and urban pests. People who live in Wilderburbs also see a higher incidence of zoonotic disease, as pathogens with travel via insect vectors jump from wildlife to humans. The snaking tendrils of urban sprawl and a new ability to telecommute have impacted our wildlands by allowing ex-urban housing developments to proliferate. These Wilderburbs afford residents a feeling of forested seclusion while keeping them connected to a suburban community, but they suffer from water distribution issues and endanger homes due to fire and wildlife interactions. Thank you for your attention, and please see the following references for more information. Here are links to the photos I added to the slideshow.